Racist cop makes shocking arrest of black colonel. Incredible truth. Exposed changes everything for Crestwood. James Harris walked slowly down the cracked pavement, the cacophony of tension wrapping around him like a suffocating cloak. Hooded eyes followed him, sharp and judgmental, fueled by prejudice that sharpened with each deliberate step he took through his childhood hometown. Colonel James Harris, a veteran with a trunk full of medals and a doctorate in sociology, now felt like an intruder in Crestwood, a town divided as fiercely today as it had ever been. The whispers of his past, once something he could distance himself from, now echoed ominously in the hollow spaces of his mind. His heart raced with indignation alongside a desperate need to protect the once proud legacy of his father. A local pastor laid low by illness. He had served his country, educated students across the nation, and championed the very values of unity and understanding. Yet here, in the shadow of dilapidated homes, he couldn't shake the immune pang of resentment toward the very authorities meant to safeguard his community. It ate at him, gnawing at his essence until he was left hollow and betrayed. As he turned a corner, the imposing figure of Officer Mike Thompson came into view, a local cop notorious for his heavy-handedness and racially charged remarks. James's breath faltered, a mixture of dread and anger bubbled up in him. He had spent a lifetime pressing against the injustices of his past. "Not today," he whispered under his breath, engaging the memory of the strength instilled in him by his father. Still, every rational thought slipped through his fingers as Officer Thompson approached. "Who do we have here?" Thompson growled, arm crossed defiantly. "Officer Thompson," James began, keeping his tone respectful, threading the needle between politeness and assertiveness. "I'm here to see my father in the hospital." But the officer's eyes hardened, misinterpreting professionalism as arrogance. The very air thickened with hostility, suffocating his intentions. Before he could say more, the world spun into chaos. Words collided. He was suddenly the one on the stand. "What's a colonel doing back here?" Thompson snapped, glaring. "Shouldn't you be out there, all high and mighty?" Each word felt like a soldier's boot, stepping further onto his pride. James's hands tightened, rage bubbling dangerously beneath the surface, yet he tried to maintain an even expression. "I'm doing my best. It's people like you who foster these divisions," Thompson spat, and the badge that symbolized protection suddenly morphed into a weapon wielded with righteous indignation. The weight of his father's illness, the ancestral burdens, and the sting of prejudices battered against him, forcing a depth of vulnerability that James had buried for too long. "Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." Bonds tore apart as his past raced back, drowning him in regret and disappointment. He thought of his ancestors, chained by the weight of history. Every scream for justice whispered into the air, a burden he bore. How could he speak where silence felt safer? What would that mean for his family? Each second hung thick with unresolved tension, building toward a confrontation, and the community now stirred as if waiting for a fight to ignite. James's resolve flickered with every breath. Should he confront Thompson and challenge this systemic injustice, or hold his tongue for the sake of his father's dignity? The burden of legacy pressed hard against his chest. Tension crackled, both men standing frozen, knowing that neither would walk away unchanged. As the moments dragged, he felt a deep, roaring anger swell, demanding that he take a stand, desperate to be heard, to break the silence that had chained his family and the community for generations. The outcome teetered on a knife's edge, set in motion, until finally one of them would move. James felt the weight of expectation heavy in the humid air, eyes, especially those of Officer Thompson, boring into him as if waiting for an act or utterance that might unleash the dam of unresolved animosity. He breathed deeply, inhaling the pungent mix of asphalt, sweat, and that lingering bitterness that clung to Crestwood like an unwelcome guest. Memories danced in his mind, flashes of laughter, lessons learned, and the innocent dreams of childhood, juxtaposed against this moment of potential conflict. How had it come to this? Moments before confronting the hardest truths about his hometown, he was flung back to the past. Riding his bike along these very streets, the laughter of friends beside him, the affection of a father who believed in justice and compassion. The connection to those memories ran deep, echoing now with a poignant reminder that change was both necessary and difficult. "Speak up, Colonel. You think you're better than the rest of us?" Thompson's sneer cut through the fog of nostalgia like a knife. The officer's voice dripped with disdain, a siren call to contest the very essence of how far James had come and who he represented now. The internal clock of his mind ticked louder. He could either embody the peaceful leader he had always strived to be, or unleash the fury that had long simmered below his calm exterior. Officers like Thompson thrived off provocation. They sought submission or retaliation, each a means to an end. Was this his chance to voice the struggles, to unfold the history that had plagued his people, the agony compounded with every year of silence? "I'm not better than anyone here," James responded, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I will not stand by while you perpetuate the very divides that cause the pain you see in this community." Thompson flinched as if struck, and for a moment even he was taken aback by the fortitude in James's words. There it was, the foundational truth he had guarded all along. The man who wore his medals with pride and carried a doctorate wasn't just a soldier. He was a voice for the marginalized, a harbinger for those who could not speak. The potency of self-advocacy lit a fire in James's chest, forcing him to loosen the stranglehold of fear that had kept him silent for too long. He remained planted, anchoring himself against the rising tide of contempt in Thompson's eyes, the embers of defiance stoked stronger, pushing him beyond the bounds of personal grievance into a space of accountability. "This isn't about you or me. It's about the truth." The words reverberated between them like a stunning realization. As Thompson's jaw tightened, an array of flashing lights appeared in the distance, circling like vultures, waiting for a field of battle. In his heart, James knew this was the moment that would carve a path forward, or cement his fears into a lifetime of avoidance. He glanced toward the hospital, the destination that loomed large in his mind, but he also saw a chance to shift the narrative, redirecting anger toward a dialogue that could ultimately resonate beyond this street corner. What if he could challenge not only the man before him, but also stir a conversation in his community? He was more than just a colonel. He was a catalyst for change, a bearer of broken stories. However, that realization brought with it the sudden sharp pang of vulnerability, a fear of consequences that could ripple beyond this moment. James squared his shoulders, unwavering now in his stance, ready to confront Thompson's accusations with dignity. The dangerous dance between silence and speech had made its choice, and he felt emboldened by the release. "You don't have to be an enemy. We can solve this together, officer. Let's talk." But the thickness of the air shifted once more as Thompson took a menacing step forward. The crowd began to swell, tension mounting as the anticipated confrontation hung precariously. Would they back him, or would he face judgment not only from Thompson, but from the entire town? His heart thudded unexpectedly. Perhaps this was the moment for clarity, to redefine the boundaries and narratives controlling Crestwood, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would spark something vital in others. But as the sirens blared closer, the situation stretched the limits of his resolve. What outcome awaited him? Would he stand strong against the tide of animosity, or would something darker unfold in the shadows of Crestwood? The answer loomed, pressing, inevitable, and painfully out of his control. James felt the ground shift beneath him as Thompson loomed closer, the crowd around them a living entity, breathing tension and uncertainty. He was caught in a maelstrom, his mind racing with possibilities. Was he ready to bear the consequences of what he was about to say? In this moment, every second felt elongated, the air thicker, charged with an urgency that made it almost unbearable. The flashing lights painted the asphalt in a chaotic mix of red and blue, a celestial spectacle of authority descending upon the scene. In the depths of his mind, James replayed those same streets from his childhood, filled with warmth and laughter, now warped into something foreboding. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It felt like a test of character. "Tell me then, Colonel." Thompson's voice sliced through his thoughts, a deliberate provocation. "What truth are you willing to share that'll change anything around here? Perhaps the truth that you don't own these streets, not the badge you wear, and not the fear you sow." The confidence surprised even him, though laced with an underlying tremor. A ripple of murmurs cut through the gathered crowd. He could see the mixture of disbelief and curiosity, the way their faces shifted, reflecting the life they had been living under the weight of oppression. The momentary sliver of hope ignited a spark within him, urging him to continue. "This community deserves better than your version of justice," he pushed, leaning forward to narrow the space between them. "You choose to see only what fits your narrative, rather than hearing the truth from those around you." Thompson's glare was relentless, fury boiling just below the surface, glinting in his eyes like a sharp blade. Yet for a brief flash, James detected a flicker of uncertainty. Was he reaching him, or merely stoking the flames of hate? The sirens blared louder, and James glanced over his shoulder, a fleeting thought traveling through his mind. This could escalate quickly, spiraling out of control in an instant. He had been trained to handle conflict, to diffuse volatile situations, but that training had never prepared him for a battlefield like this one, his own hometown turned against him. "Do you really understand what you're doing?" Thompson barked, his face contorting in agony, as if wrestling with his own demons. Perhaps this was the real conflict, James mused, a battle within that manifested externally. "You think this is some kind of game?" "No, officer, this isn't a game." James's voice was firm, threading a calm through the storm. "It's a matter of life and death for many here." The crowd surged forward, an invisible connection binding them as they began to echo his sentiments. The realization was catching. If he could harness that momentum, maybe he wouldn't just be the lone voice in a cacophonous arena. But abruptly, Thompson moved forward again, aggressive and reckless, tearing the fragile tension apart. "You're out of your league. This is my town and my turf." The exchange felt like a rope pulled taut, waiting for the inevitable snap. The space between fear and courage narrowed rapidly. If Thompson struck first, would James resort to the disciplined restraint he had always prided himself on? Or would he give in to the primal urge for self-preservation? He caught a glimpse of Officer Thompson's trembling hands, the raw emotion surfacing in an easy fit of rage. Could it be that fear and vulnerability were buried beneath his hostility? James took a deep breath, stepping back, but drawing strength from the crowd's shared anger and frustration. "That's not the legacy you want to leave behind," he implored, searching his adversary's eyes for recognition. As the sirens drew nearer still, the implications of that truth reached warmer still, stitching a fragile seam of connection between them. This was no mere confrontation. It was a moment poised on the edge of change, a reckoning. Would this confrontation lead to prison bars, or the forging of a path toward accountability? The answer danced just out of reach, a haunting echo of possibility swelling within the unresolved air and his troubled heart. But as Thompson's features hardened again, it became clear The time had come to either fight for his truth or resign himself to the choking silence that had plagued Crestwood for too long. Would he find the courage to stand his ground or succumb to the overwhelming tide of hostility? James felt a flicker of something unexpected, the pulse of possibility sparking in the collective breath of the crowd. He was no longer just a name on a uniform or a colonel in service. Here, surrounded by familiar faces warped by tension and misunderstanding, he was a catalyst, a living embodiment of their struggle and their unvoiced hopes. "Step back, Colonel," Thompson insisted, his jaw clenched. The intimidating bulk of the officer loomed over him, but it was the tension in the air that was truly suffocating. The crowd's growing murmur felt electric, though, each voice lending strength to James's own. He took a deep breath. It was now or never. "I understand all too well," he said, anchoring his tone against the wrenching uncertainty within him. "I understand the weight of your badge, your decisions, and how it feels to wield authority." The truth spilled from his mouth, raw but resolute. "But you need to understand the fear you've been cultivating in us, in this very place we both once called home." Thompson's eyes narrowed, and for a moment James thought he saw a shadow of realization flicker across his enemy's face. Yet it was gone as quickly as it appeared, buried under layers of stubbornness and rage. "Stop pretending to empathize with me," Thompson snapped back, losing credibility with every sharp word. But James sensed something had shifted. The officer was losing control, the way that people do when confronted with their stark truth, when their facade of invulnerability cracks under the weight of accountability. "Empathy doesn't fit into your narrative, does it?" James pressed, voice steadying, building upon that flicker of vulnerability he had gleaned from Thompson's stance. "You can only see the enemy in front of you, but what if you chose to see the human behind the uniform?" The crowd's murmur morphed into a chorus of voices that echoed James's sentiments. Hope surged again, swirling through him like a newfound resolve. He wasn't just a colonel, he was part of something larger than himself, a reflection of their collective angst, a spark in the dark chaos. As those flashing lights danced around them, illuminating the rawness of the moment, James felt time stretching. Each second was excruciating, yet exhilarating. He was inching closer to a profound revelation. He was seizing the narrative from the very jaws of hostility. "Look around, Officer Thompson," he implored with a calm intensity. "What happens here today will echo far beyond this moment. You have a choice to make. Will you continue to fuel this fire, or will you stand down and be the protector we so desperately need?" Thompson hesitated, a flicker of indecision shuddering through his posture. James's heart raced, knowing this was a pivotal moment. The foundations of Thompson's authority had begun to tremble, revealing the underlying cracks of doubt. Would he choose to recede and acknowledge the truth that had been set before him, or would he double down on the path of antagonism? With the crowd behind him, and conviction seeping into every breath, James sensed that this confrontation was not merely an ending. It was a preamble to a reckoning that could reshape everything. But just as hopes began to swell, Thompson regained his composure, the anger painting his features anew. "You think you're special, don't you? You really think this changes anything?" "No," James replied, his voice steady. "But it might change everything if you let it." As Thompson's eyes hardened again, James braced himself, feeling the full weight of his words and the fragile hope in the air. Would this confrontation inspire change, or lead to a destructive escalation? Just as he contemplated the answer, a distant vehicle rolled into view, its sirens blaring, and a new wave of uncertainty flooded the tense atmosphere. What would come next? The moment hung like a taut string, vibrating with both danger and opportunity, leaving James poised on the precipice of a crossroads that promised either redemption or despair. James's heart dropped as the siren's wail pierced the burgeoning tension, reverberating in the hollow of his chest. It felt like an omen, heralding an unwelcome shift. The spotlight had sharpened, illuminating the increasing stakes of his confrontation. If Thompson persisted in rejecting the empathy James tried to instill, what would the flashing lights bring? As the black and white patrol car drew nearer, James discerned the uncertain glances cast between the officers inside and the onlookers gathering around them. Power and fear were palpable, swirling like a tempest on the edge of chaos. James realized he stood at a pivotal intersection, questioning not only Thompson's next move, but also the path his own life had taken. "Stay with me," he whispered to himself, aiming to anchor his fraying nerves. The self-doubt had become all too familiar, crawling into his consciousness the moment he rejected a strictly militaristic response to the discontent around him. Yet, undeniably, something had shifted within him. This wasn't merely about authority. This was about duty, humanity, and the responsibility to stand firm with those unjustly treated. "Colonel," Thompson's voice broke through his thoughts, snapping him back. "I'll handle this." There was a warning woven into the officer's tone, a warning that would either cement their rift or spark a change. "Handle it? You mean stifle it?" James countered, raising his voice just above the murmur, disassembling the invisible wall that guarded their faces, the mask of authority Thompson hid behind. The crowd surged forward instinctively, drawn into the magnetic pull of his defiance. They mirrored his emotions and fueled his conviction, handing him the courage he previously thought absent. Moments ago, he had felt isolated, confronting an embodiment of fear. Now he acknowledged their shared struggle, tight-knit yet fragmented, written on every anxious face. "Aren't you tired of being the hammer?" James challenged Thompson, who was now seething with the pressure of conflicting interests. "Look at them. They are not just statistics or threats to your power. They are fathers, mothers, children, deserving of respect." "Shut this down, Colonel," Thompson barked, but the order lacked his former disdain. What once seemed insurmountable now flickered with potential. James could almost taste the possibility of change as it filled the air. He stepped closer, feeling the gravity of the moment. "Listen to your conscience, officer. Embrace the chance to redefine your role. This is not a battle to be won, but a chance to earn their trust." Each word solidified James's resolve. Instead of merely confronting external forces, this confrontation was about his own evolution. He felt bravery and vulnerability intertwining beautifully, demonstrating the duality of true leadership. To lead did not solely mean to command. It encompassed listening, understanding, and fundamentally reshaping existing narratives. Then from the patrol car, a second officer stepped out, signaling a deepening chaos. The arrest unfolding was not just of him or the angry crowd. There was a sense that the realities they lived were about to be bared before them all. This was the moment James feared and craved. This was about to become a corridor of truth. Feeling the weight of impending consequences, he refocused his attention. He needed to approach this carefully. This was not just about Thompson. The sirens echoed around them, a warning of the broader implications that transcended that singular moment. "Where do you stand, Thompson?" he asked, eyes narrowed with determination, hoping to see through the officer's hardened exterior. The atmosphere crackled. James understood he teetered just beyond the precipice. Choices loomed that would either forge or shatter his future. Would he emerge as the leader he aspired to be, or would he succumb to the chaos spiraling around him? The murmurs escalated, tension thick as treacle, awaiting one final spark. In that charged silence, the answer awaited him, a revelation hunched in the shadows, brimming with possibilities and peril. What transformation loomed in the distance, and would it embrace him or condemn him? The moment stretched like an elastic band, heightened by the awareness of every heartbeat echoing in James's ears. He didn't dare blink. He needed to capture this instant of confrontation before it solidified into a memory he might wish to forget. The fresh weight of their shared responsibility pressed against his shoulders, urging him to break through the preconceived barriers of uniformity and authority. "Thompson," he said, haunted by a mix of resolve and trepidation, "what will you choose? The authority of a badge or the humanity of these people?" The crowd shifted, their anticipation thrumming in the air. James felt a push, pulling his words into the void between them, seeking acknowledgement from the entrenched officer who had been his superior for too long. Thompson's facade cracked ever so slightly, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, surfacing through layers of defiance. "Do you think this is that easy?" Thompson snapped back, his voice strained. "You want me to play nice while they scream for justice? They don't respect authority, and they won't respect you either." James's chest heaved as he countered with newfound conviction. "Authority is not given, it must be earned. This isn't just about enforcement, it's about empathy." The intensity of his plea resonated, igniting an ember of hope among the crowd. The officers within the patrol car seemed frozen, unsure whether to act against the escalating words or to align with the unfolding empathy. Could they exchange their scripts of dominance for an uncomfortable truth? In that moment, he discovered a hidden capability within himself, a force that came not from rank or station, but from his conviction to engage in grappling with reality instead of sidelining it. "Look around, Thompson. This chaos isn't born from a lack of respect for the badge. It stems from years of neglect. Maybe if we start listening instead of shouting orders, we can forge a connection." James's posture shifted slightly, the tension easing as he felt the collective gaze of the crowd upon him. With each word cascading from his lips, he was no longer merely speaking to Thompson, he was speaking to himself. It was a phoenix moment, casting aside a rigid past for the opportunity of growth, equitable exchange, and perhaps salvation. But as the second officer drew closer, the simmering chaos threatened to boil over. James noticed Thompson's hands clench into fists at his sides, the internal battle playing out visibly on his face. The faint sheen of sweat against the officer's brow spoke volumes, each drop revealing the fear of losing control, the control he had wielded so effortlessly until James's words destabilized the ground beneath him. "Do you realize," James continued, his tone steadier now, "how monumental this could be? To redefine how we engage with them." The prospect of a shift, unthinkable mere minutes ago, now felt tangible, as if the walls around them were ready to budge. A momentary silence fell, accompanied by the cacophony of shuffling feet and murmurs, as if the atmosphere conspired to give pause to this critical intersection of change. It was now, in this crucible of doubt and fear, that James faced a profound revelation about himself. His voice held power, soft but undeniable. It could challenge the very foundations that governed their interactions. Yet within this burgeoning awakening, a deeper conflict emerged. Would the trust he sought to foster be recognized, or would it be crushed under the weight of a fear-bound system? It loomed like a responsive echo, bouncing back, insistent that the next move remained unmade, one that might radically shift the course of their actions. "Let's take that first step, Thompson, together." But just as Thompson opened his mouth to respond, the second officer issued an ultimatum, the tension renewed, festering like an unchecked wound. This moment could shatter everything James had fought for, but it could also create a bridge toward a new understanding. What decision would Thompson make, and how would it cascade across the line they never thought they would need to walk together? James felt the thickening air around him, heavy with anticipation, charged with the possibility of change. He stood at the precipice, fully aware that every word spoken would potentially shift the trajectory of not just the moment, but his entire career. The ultimatum from the second officer loomed over him like a thundercloud, threatening to unleash chaos. Would Thompson align with the public outcry, or would he cling to the status quo? "Thompson," James pressed again, urgency lacing his tone. This isn't just about us. This is about redefining our roles. If you take a stand with me today, we begin to build trust. Why is that so terrifying? Thompson's jaw tightened, and James noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a telltale sign of the internal struggle he had hoped to provoke. The officer was wrestling not merely with this moment, but with every decision leading to it. A career steeped in rigid enforcement weighed against an awakening to the realities of those he judged. Like you said, it's not easy, Thompson finally admitted, his voice quieter, the gruffness tinged with vulnerability. I've spent my life trying to uphold the law. I don't know how to pivot from authority to compassion. James felt a flicker of understanding. In that instant he realized that Thompson's hesitance stemmed from a more profound fear, the fear of inadequacy. It's a journey, Thompson. We all started somewhere. Acknowledging that isn't weakness, it's strength. The crowd had become a living entity, shifting uncomfortably as the pauses grew weightier. Murmurs swept through them, uniting voices of doubt with those daring to hope for change. They watched this exchange with equal parts anxiety and anticipation, and James felt their hope reflected back as something he needed to nurture. "Will you trust me?" James asked, sincerity etched into every word. "We can initiate a new dialogue, a community even, if only you're willing to step down from that pedestal." Thompson's gaze faltered. It was less about James's words and more about the challenge to his identity. Each heartbeat echoed against the fabric of his profession and personal beliefs, shaking the foundations of a life lived within stark black-and-white lines. James had reached out for understanding, but in doing so, he was about to unleash the potential for real transformation. As if on cue, the second officer's irritation boiled over. "You think this is some kind of game? There are rules. You're jeopardizing everything." James turned to face this new source of tension. "What's more dangerous, us breaking the rules or us continuing to uphold a broken system? This is our chance to redefine the rules, become allies, and survive." A moment of quiet introspection enveloped them, a realization that their actions would speak volumes about who they chose to be, not just today, but forever. Would they continue the cycle of antagonism or choose a path toward mutual respect? Just then, Thompson took a deep breath, the weight of the moment pressing down on him as if the enormity of the decision already lingered on his shoulders. "You talk a good game, James, but what happens if this doesn't work? What if we get buried under the backlash?" "Then we adapt, we grow, and we learn," James replied, his heart thundering with the prospect of risk. "But it's better to face the backlash together than to stand apart in silence." The choice hung tantalizingly in the air, thick with possibility and risk. Would Thompson rise to the occasion, stepping into a new narrative alongside James? Or would the old ways cling desperately to power? As Thompson opened his mouth to reply, a siren blared in the distance, a jarring reminder of their reality. The tension surged again, washing over James like a cold wave, reverberating his sense of urgency. James wondered if he had pushed too far, if the balance had tilted too decisively. Was there enough time left to forge this alliance before the forces of fear tore them apart? It all came down to a single moment, which was now swirling with lingering uncertainty, echoing the universal truth of change. It must be actively embraced, or will inevitably be crushed. Would Thompson embrace the humanity in front of him, or would the siren's wail herald a return to their fractured past? James's heart raced as he absorbed the weight of Thompson's dilemma. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the air like a knife, and he could feel the momentum shifting away from the transformative conversation he desperately wanted to nurture. What if this moment eclipsed the chance they had to redefine their relationship? "Thompson," he urged, stepping closer, narrowing the physical distance, trying to close the emotional chasm. "This is our opportunity. Just a few words can change everything." But the second officer's voice cut through the thickening tension, disdain lacing his tone. "You're naive, James. Trust. In this world it's a commodity nobody can afford. You're risking your neck for a fairy tale." James felt the sting of that judgment, and a wave of anger surged in him. The crowd was still, eyes flickering between the three. It was all too real. This was not just about him or Thompson. It was about every hope that had been crushed by fear and misunderstanding. "Maybe it feels like a fairy tale to you," James countered, his voice steely, betraying none of the fear clawing at him inside. "But I refuse to accept that it's impossible. And if you view it that way, it says far more about you than it does about me." Thompson's eyes darted back to the crowd, now buzzing with whispers. Concern fell clearly on his brow. It was a moment of realization. James's conviction was at odds with the established narrative they both inhabited. James was seeking risk as a gateway to possibility, while the other officer stood firmly in the realm of fear, a safety net made of old beliefs. "I can't imagine betraying everything I've ever known," Thompson finally said, seemingly torn between his duty as an officer and his burgeoning conscience. "What if the backlash is not just professional? What if it gets personal? How do I justify that?" "By reflecting on what really matters," James shot back, his resolve strengthening. "You've been entrusted with this badge to protect and serve, but serving doesn't have to mean suppressing humanity. You can redefine what that badge stands for." But as Thompson wrestled visibly with his emotions, doubt resurfaced. What if James's proposal led to destruction rather than healing? The sound of angry voices erupted from the back of the crowd, breaking through their charged silence. Tension hung in the air like mist, and James's vision narrowed to the impending confrontation. He had to act. "Look, Thompson," he insisted, urgency bubbling beneath his skin. "The world is changing, and so must we. We have the chance to be part of that change. Stand with me." The siren wailed again, louder now, as shadows of police cars began to flicker in the distance. Every second stretched out, leaving James with a sickening sense of dread. There was no more time to persuade. Choices had to be made right now. "I've never understood your world," Thompson finally admitted, his shakiness betraying the internal conflict. "I've always seen it through a lens of authority, but maybe there's a way to learn. I'm terrified of what I don't know." James took a deep breath, realizing this was the very crux of personal development, accepting vulnerability amid fear. "And so am I, Thompson. But we can either stay terrified in silence or take that leap together. This isn't just for us. It's for those who believe in something more. It's real." For a moment, the choice settled like a fist in the air, and James could feel the collective breath of the crowd, fragile yet hopeful, waiting to see if Thompson would step forward and grasp that chance for growth at both a personal and professional level. Then the officer's face hardened, a decision looming. But the backlash was growing closer, and now the sound of footsteps echoed in alarm. Would Thompson risk everything, or would the quickening pace of external threats dictate their actions, cementing their choice to adhere to old patterns? "What if—" Thompson started, then hesitated, trapped in a moment teetering on the brink of transformation. The sirens drew nearer, heralding a return to old ways, threatening the chance they had to redefine their destinies. James knew that this choice would determine the essence of their future. Would they choose courage or retreat into the shadows? A silence filled with electric potential enveloped them, each heartbeat a beat closer to revealing the truth. James's mind raced as he felt the shift in the air, the tension palpable against his skin. Thompson's indecision hung heavy, a moment layered with potential yet bound by chains of fear and duty. Every pulse of silence drew out the urgency of their situation. They were at a crossroads, and time was not on their side. The officer's internal struggle was a mirror to James's own. Could risking everything for the sake of change ever truly justify itself? James had spent years questioning the systems around him, but had never stood at this precipice, where his choices could define more than just his own story. Each heartbeat resounded with the history he was trying to paint, a narrative of collective human experience begging to be acknowledged. "Thompson," James said, striving to peel back the layers of the officer's defense, "have you ever really stopped to consider who this system serves? You're a cog, but you have the power to reshape the machine. You've seen firsthand the damage that ignorance and conformity have wrought. That badge you wear could symbolize safety, or it could become a symbol of oppression." The other officer scoffed, but James pressed on, undeterred. "You're scared, I get it. Changes invoke fear. But if we continue down this path, we become part of the problem. We have to challenge ourselves. We have to be brave. You won't lose who you are. You will evolve into who you can be." The murmurs in the crowd intensified, punctuating the moment with an aching need for resolution. This wasn't merely about Thompson. It was a reflection of the community's shared struggles. James sensed the weight of expectations resting on their shoulders, a life-changing moment for both men, an opportunity to redefine what it meant to serve. Thompson's face flickered with uncertainty. "But what if I try and fail? What if it drives people away? The backlash within my precinct could be brutal. They won't understand." "Then we'll face it together," James replied, the fervor in his voice quickening. This was more than a plea. It was a promise. "True growth comes with risks. You're not alone, and if we don't take this chance, we'll all continue to suffer the consequences of inaction. You and I have the ability to change the narrative, to challenge the toxicity ingrained in our systems." This time, he stepped even closer, ensuring Thompson could see the sincerity reflected in his eyes. "We can be the leaders that others will follow. This is your moment, not just for us, but for everyone who has felt trapped by fear. Don't you want to be proud of what you stand for?" Caught in the undertow of his own fear, but pushed by the weight of possibility, Thompson's face softened, caught between doubt and vision, blurring his reality. One internal voice nagged him about the repercussions, another whispered about hope and immediate change. Suddenly, a shout erupted from behind, punctuating their tense moment with urgency. The crowd thrived off the unpredictability of the scene, the shifting tides of loyalty, the breath held tight as anticipation seized them all. "I need to make this choice, James. I can't just jump head first and hope for the best," Thompson muttered, half to himself. It was a stark acknowledgement, exposing not only his fear, but the paralyzing uncertainty that came with wanting to break free. "Well, here's the truth," James insisted, unwilling to allow this moment to slip away. "Staying where we are isn't the safety net you think it is. It's a cage made of fear, waiting to keep you captive. We don't need everything figured out ahead of time. We need the courage to step into the unknown." Silently assessing the situation, Thompson's eyes darted between James and the looming sirens, the command of old dynamics threatening to coalesce once again. The burden was grave. The consequences of his choice were clear. At that pivotal moment, the crowd's breaths held steady as the rumbles of approaching squad cars intensified. The sound wasn't just an external threat. It echoed the looming spectre of the internal battles waging within Thompson himself. Would he break free from the shackles of fear and legacy that clouded his judgment? Would he trust in the promise James was extending, a glimmer of hope flickering within the dark confines of an old narrative? As the sirens blared closer, the truth loomed. Real change demanded resilience, and the question hung in the Herculean air. Could Thompson muster the strength to embrace a future that shattered his old perceptions? Or would he retreat into the familiar confines of his duty, shielding himself from the unknown? The moment of decision hovered just out of reach, leaving James on the brink of an uncertain outcome that could alter not only their lives, but the very fabric of their reality. What would Thompson choose when put to the ultimate test? James stood in a silence thick as fog, the sirens blaring behind him, waters shifting beneath his feet. Yet somewhere deep within, he felt a change surging, reconstructed from the embers of doubt. This was not just about his confrontation with Thompson. It was about crafting a new legacy. The crowd's eyes reflected uncertainty, but also hope, each member waiting for the path to clarity to unfold. The choice lay suspended, hot and heavy in the air. He sensed the officer's reluctance, a reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps this was much more than just a singular confrontation. It was a challenge to the world they lived in, a test of will, resolution, and understanding. "Thompson," James said, searching the officer's face for any glimmer of recognition. "Your badge symbolizes protection, the chance to stand against injustice. You have an opportunity now to redefine what that means, to lead by example." The stillness cracked as Thompson's shoulders tensed, reflective of deep-seated instincts battling against vulnerable truths. "You make it sound so simple, like it's just a flip of a switch," Thompson retorted, anxiety flitting over his eyes. "It's never just a switch," James replied, solid confidence underscoring each word. "It's a journey, a process of growth informed by struggles and reflections. Consider this. We both walked here today carrying history, but what if, together, we step forward carrying hope? Every choice made now reverberates into the future." At that moment, he felt the weight of possibility swirling against them. As if responding to James's conviction, Thompson took a deeper breath, contemplating the nature of their confrontation. Was he finally beginning to perceive the humanity in the very people he had once viewed solely through fear? "Yes, it's daunting," James assured him, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. "And it's not devoid of risks. But imagine this community in harmony, each person valued, every voice respected, not as a threat, but as a part of something greater. That begins with us." The officers in the patrol car leaned forward, straining to catch the essence of this newfound dialogue. James recognized that a transformation was buzzing, a pivotal shift in the ether surrounding them. He could feel it. Uncertainty faltered at the hands of possibility. The seconds dragged like hours, and the urgency hung like mist. "What if we redefine how we interact today?" Thompson murmured, wrestling with the idea of forging a new path. "What if I stand with you, not just for myself, but for the community?" "Then we begin," James exclaimed, the joy swelling through him, pushing him to hold Thompson's gaze, hoping to ground that flicker of understanding into conviction. In that moment, James saw the tumult of transformation in Thompson's eyes, a desire to break free from entrenched ideologies, battling against the innate fear of the unknown. And it was exhilarating. The siren music swelled beyond just sound. It became a chant of opportunity waiting to surface. With a deepening breath, James saw Thompson finally release the rigid expectation that had colored his interactions for so long. "I want to be someone who can listen, to do better. We can do better." The crowd erupted. Gasps of surprise turned into cautious cheers. Recognition dawned upon them, as if collectively peeling back the layers of prejudice and dismissiveness that had held so many captive. Hope began seeping into their hearts, buoyed by the weighty dialogue they had just witnessed. In the stillness that followed, Thompson stood a little straighter. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to learn. I'll do what it takes to foster connection, to be a protector, someone people can trust." "Trust begins with vulnerability, Thompson," James affirmed, a reassuring smile gracing his features. "Together, we'll forge a connection that uplifts our community." As sirens receded into the background, the weight of commitment pressed into place. They were both irrevocably changed. James felt a personal evolution, breaking free from chains forged in quiet desperation. His career would now represent not only homage to his father, but also a dedication to foster empathy within policing. With the crowd's fervor surrounding them, James took a deep breath in parallel with the welcoming warmth between them. His heart hammered with pride, not just for himself but for the community he stood within, each face a testament to their shared struggle and the work ahead. "We will draft a new narrative," James declared, infusing strength into his sincerity, "one where every voice matters, where truth galvanizes our actions and understanding leads us forward." The officer's shoulder relaxed, and in that crucial moment, anomaly melted away as they shifted from adversaries into partners in transformative change. Together, they stood as living proof that vulnerability leads to breakthrough, and as the sun broke through the fog to cast light upon Crestwood, James felt a necessary awakening surge within him. James Harris emerged from that hall of mirrors, bolstered by recognition of his journey, an evolving legacy that would echo long after the discord ceased. Today marked not an endpoint, but a confident milestone on his ongoing quest for unity and reaffirmation of dignity, and it was clear this was only the beginning. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Seriously, it makes a difference. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support. You need to subscribe now because true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of spreading the message. Don't wait even one more second to share.